Good morning, everyone. Thursday. After being here for, 5 days, some of you? My goodness. I appreciate you showing up. I really do. And Paul, thank you for that beautiful announcement. It's always so much more of a pleasure to be able to speak to an audience when the audience shows up, so thank you. So today, we're gonna be talking about the concept of this role of Chief Data Officer. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I was weaned in structured analysis and design techniques and then information engineering principles. And throughout that weaning process, it was always very important that when we look at the definition and the description of what companies do, those sentences are made up of verbs and nouns, the verbs being the processes that act upon something and the nouns being the information that's produced. So it was always deeply embedded in me that both are necessary, a real good understanding of process, how information is being created, used, manipulated, leveraged, as well as the nouns of the organization, the data. So there's always been this need for a balanced focus. And this rising of this concept of Chief Data Officer continues to bring the noun part to the table on the business side, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So it was in the 50s. It was about when we started automating some business, and it started out with using technology to automate the accounting function. So what ended up happening is in the technical side of businesses, we started seeing these directors of data processing. It was about automating the processing of accounting data. And then through the 60s and 70s, we leveraged those same technologies to start automating more of the business functional life cycle. We started automating the tracking of sales and order management and service delivery and things of that sort. So the top IT job morphed from a director of data processing to directors of management information systems. And then in about the 80s timeframe, the likes of DAMA and IBM and Business Week started throwing out this concept that, hey, we need a chief. Because they were seeing more and more instances where the chief executive officers were inviting the manager of information management system or the director of information management systems to the C-suite table to sit and help understand the business strategies and the impacts on technologies. So the likes, again, of DAMA, IBM, Business Week started throwing around the idea, hey, maybe that director of MIS should be a new chief called the Chief Information Officer. And so in the 80s, that concept was born. We had a new chief that sat at the table. Over the years now, when you look at the incredible complexity that chief information officers have to manage today, with the proliferation of the kinds of application systems, we have these huge ERP systems that have tens of millions of dollars in licensing costs, all the infrastructure that's running underneath there. It used to be we had these big old mainframes. Now we got these plethora of boxes with multiple blades and the disbursement of workloads either in my data center or across multiple data centers, in the cloud. Bring your own device. I've got suites of BI tools and data management tools and yada, yada, yada. So I'm managing this incredible capital and operating expense budget as a chief information officer, and that consumes a lot of my time, right? Not to mention, I also have to sit at the suite and try to understand the business strategies. And all the while, so top of mind focus is those things that are on the balance sheet, those capital items and those operating expense items that are showing up on the financials. That's top of mind for me. If I've got budgets, anyway, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in budget, I'm going to focus on those line items. Well, guess what? Data is not a line item on our balance sheet. It's not an asset. It's not valued. So when the CIO is looking at what he's managing, he knows he's got responsibility for making sure data is available and that it's created and it's made available to the business. But managing the data as an asset, that's not top of mind for a CIO, yet he's accountable for it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so I'm going to start, since this is a data warehouse conference, I'm going to use kind of a data warehouse example, and I'm going to use this metaphor of a duplex. So duplex has multiple living units in it within one structure, right? So I've got these two different units that can have different functions, and in this case, we have a four-bedroom unit duplex and a one-bedroom unit duplex. They're tightly coupled because they're in one physical structure, so there's some sharing of foundational components, right? And we all know in our journeys with data warehousing and business intelligence and predictive analytics, still the vast majority of our time is around managing the data, right? The acquisition, the curation, the integration, the distribution and security and privacy, everything around managing data is still the majority of our work, right? And then we get it delivered out and we consume it. Our projects typically still have that 80-20 kind of rule. It might be 78, 22, I don't know. But vast majority of our work is still in the data management space, right? And if I change data management to data asset management and put that kind of lens over it, it's around who's defining what data should be and what it is, who's defining the rules for standardization from the point of creation to the point of integration with other data points, the points of using it, and who's rationalizing, who's responsible for rationalizing the redundant data. At the end of the day, even if I have a large ERP system, that ERP system is not automating everything in the business, right? I still have other application systems that have some niches around it, and yet each one of these software vendors, when they sell you their product, they consider themselves the center of the universe, so they all have their own product master. They all will have their own customer master, and that forces us to have to move data between those applications. So who's responsible for the proper rules around that rationalization and integration between those apps? And then finally, who's responsible for the definition of what makes for a sanitized and cleansed piece of information so that at the end of the day, I've got reliable, trustworthy, shareable information that can be reused over and over again with a high degree of confidence. Those are the capabilities and the responsibilities when I look at data from a data asset management perspective. And when I look at the management of databases, the hows, how do I store it and how do I deliver it, that's a technology thing, right? And that happens in data delivery as well as in the data storage. But the what side of it is a business thing. The definition of data, the definition of standardization and cleansing and rules for who should have access, rules of engagement against the data and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the business owns the creation, the utilization, the rules around what makes for good data. IT constantly, what do? As an IT professional, we sit down with the business and try to get out of their head all these rules so we can figure out some way of instantiating it and being a good custodian of it. But at the end of the day, we continually have to go to the business community because it's their data. It's their operations that are producing that data. Peter Aiken, his point is, when you look at some of the durable technical components, the durable assets and the durable components within IT, the one durable component of data is the one reusable, non-depletable resource. And the more it is reused, the more it's leveraged, the higher its value increases, right? And it's non-depletable because I can use it over and over again, right? And if I'm doing a good job at curating it, its value gets to increase as I drive to reuse it. So let me use some examples. CEO walks up to a CFO and asks him, so I'd like an accounting of the company's financial assets. Bear in mind, I said data's not on there. And imagine, if you will, the CFO said, well, I think I got enough money to pay the bills this month. I'm not sure how much receivables are coming in. And, I'm not really sure what we're going to use our capital surplus to go out and make additional investments. My sense is that CFO is going to be looking for a new job, and probably the CEO as well, right? Use another example. The CEO walks up to the chief information officer and says, hey, give me an accounting of the data assets. And the CIO is going to say, well, I don't have a full and complete inventory of all the data we have. I know I got a lot. I've got, I can tell you in terabytes how much is under management. But I'm not sure what data is in which database. We have a feel for it. And I know there's some redundancy and there's some inconsistency. Let me think about it. That CIO probably doesn't get fired because, again, it's not one of those durable assets that's on the balance sheet, right? And that could be a funny story, except when you look at some of the studies that have been done, and one of the most notable is from Larry English, when he went and interviewed extensively 100 companies and went into each of the functional areas within the company to really understand their disciplines around data management, data asset management in particular. And from his study, he quantified this, and from his study, he's saying on an annual basis, just in the US alone, we're losing $1.2 trillion in sunk costs because of riot data. And what I mean by riot data is it's data that's redundant, it's inconsistent, it's obsolete, or it's, I forgot what the T is, trivial. Getting into that study a little bit, Larry looked at the marketing function within one organization, and he just quantified the sunk cost in people time spent doing scrap and rework because of riot data. He looked at the amount of operating expense with actual durable goods, sending out the flyers and paying for email campaigns and whatnot, and then the computing resources underneath those processes. And what he shows, just within this one department, within this one company, on an annual basis, they were spending $5 million in marketing campaigns that was sunk because of riot data, sending the same campaign to the same people, or sending campaigns out to people that don't exist, or to addresses that are no longer for that person. And then he's also went and looked at, on the IT side, to calculate how much of the total IT budget is allocated and focused on supporting riot. And what he saw was almost two-thirds of the total IT budget was tied into managing scrap and rework. Right? So you can imagine just extrapolating from that. When Larry went out to 4 other functional areas within the same company, he came up with a total of $14 million in sunk costs just on the operations side. And if you extrapolate that out to the 100 companies that he reviewed, that's how we get to this $1.2 trillion. That's pretty significant. Right? I mean, $1.2 trillion taken right off the bottom line of organizations. So why do we stink at asset management? Well, first of all, we don't teach data as an earning asset, as an asset on the balance sheet. We don't teach these kind of concepts in our universities. There's very few certifications that really drive to it, with some notable exceptions being here at TDWI and some other organizations. So the fundamental principles, the concepts aren't even being taught to us, right? And business doesn't treat data as an asset. It's kind of a byproduct of them doing their job. Now, they will get real upset when the data is not there because it's IT's job to take care of it. And IT is like, well, we're doing our best to be custodians, but we don't really understand what you're trying to do with it. We don't understand why you create it the way you do, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no one looking at data as an earning asset, which is interesting to me because especially now, there's more and more companies that are selling their data and generating direct revenue off of it. Why wouldn't that be on our balance sheet? Right? So because the business doesn't consider data as an asset, as part of that, they also look at IT as data processing, right? That's IT's job, right? It's IT's responsibility. Yet the technicians within IT, we take a very, by and large, and I know there's notable exceptions, and those exceptions are growing, but by and large, we treat data from a technology view, right? It's about making sure we design the databases and that the data is getting to those databases and we back those databases up and they're available and the performance around that is meeting SLAs and whatnot. But treating it as an asset, the content of it as an asset is still not something that 90% of IT professionals really have in their mindset. We still take a very technology view. So as a result, IT leaders are being looked upon as the owners of data, yet we're not data knowledgeable. We don't create the data. We don't define the rules for what makes for good data. We don't decide who should have access to it. We implement all these things, but we get those rules out of the business community. And at the end of the day, we don't have authority over making sure that those rules are being created properly so that what we instantiate is accurate. So it's kind of a tough scenario we're in. So if we look at, so who's responsible? Who's responsible for data asset management? Well, IT says it's the business. Either the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer, or the marketing officer, the sales officer, or the service manager in those various lines of businesses. Or maybe it's just the business unit managers or the power users. Or some are even saying the frontline workers, the people entering the data. Which kind of strikes me as that'd be interesting to give them authority. So IT's pointing at the business, and the business saying, nah, it's the CIO or the CEO, CTO, right? It's the IT guys. It's those guys in IT. It's their job. The guys that own the administration and support of an ERP system. Or maybe it's the data warehouse group. Yeah, let's pick on the data warehouse guys. They're bringing all that data together. They're the integrator of everything, owner of nothing, but when that data is wrong, we can point at them and say, hey, you guys messed up our data, right? Or other cross-functional units like enterprise architecture folks, right? Or maybe it's the data quality people. Yeah, let's put it on them. Right? Problem there is data quality people aren't responsible for the creation of the data, the rules around the data. They can enforce the stuff, right? So what we have here is a failure to collaborate, right? Someone needs to own this data because it's becoming much more critical to our organizations to be viewed as an asset. So we got a lot of chiefs, right? And what do these chiefs have in common? Oh, I know, yeah. Yeah, they got a great paycheck, awesome benefits, executive administrators, admins. They get a corner office with windows and a door, right? But seriously, I'll laugh at my own stuff. You guys relax out there. What the chiefs on the functional side of the house, in the business side of the house, they're responsible for a singular, well-defined functional area or subject of their organization. The finance officer is responsible for the books, right? The marketing officer is responsible for generating market awareness and creating the appropriate leads to the sales officer who's responsible for sales, et cetera, right? And each of these executives, they're very knowledgeable in that functional domain within their organization, as well as they're very knowledgeable in the industry domain that the company competes in, right? They have special expertise. And many times they have a lot of qualifications and certifications around that expertise, like CPAs and things like that for the chief finance officer. And there's a lot of knowledge and skills and ability that they have around the management of that asset that's in their title, the asset of marketing, the asset of sales, et cetera. And they have direct authority over the people to make the decisions to make sure that the management of that asset is accurate. But let's look at what the CIO is dealing with. The CIO is responsible for all technology, right? All development across all application systems and all the data that's being produced in those application systems, right? That's a lot of scope of responsibility. That's 3 key subject areas, if you will, right? And they're not able to devote all their time and attention to managing the data because, again, that's not on the balance sheet at the end of the day. What they're worried about is the budget around licensing costs, infrastructure costs, protecting myself from compliance issues, protecting myself from security threats, right? I've got a bunch of people. I got a budget. I got a people roster that I got to build career development around. Last thing that's on top of my mind is managing data as an asset, because it's not in my comp plan. That's not part of what I'm measured against, because it's not measurable today. Right? So I'm supposed to be data knowledgeable, but it's not a part of my job qualification, and I don't have any expertise around data asset management. I'm pretty good at technical management, but not that asset management. So there's no uniform education or certification around that element of data asset management. And there's not by and large, there's not this deep knowledge around managing data as an asset. And at the end of the day, even though I'm considered responsible for the data, I don't have authority over the people that are defining the rules for creation, the rules for quality, et cetera, and the rules for use. I implement it, but I'm not responsible for it. So I'm constantly trying to get that information from the folks that are thinking that I'm responsible. So I got responsibility with no authority. I've got accountability with no authority. That's a challenge for a CIO. And if we look at the background of CIOs, the vast majority, historically, based on a study that Aiken did in 2011, the vast majority of CIOs come from a business background. Yet they've got this technology thing that's top of mind as far as their budget management. We even have HR people making up 25% of the CIOs in this study. And in recent years, just in the last couple years, we're seeing more and more IT career development paths that have brought themselves to the CIO role. Yet when I look at the top 4 things that a CIO needs to have as qualifications, hands-on technical background. Yet a vast majority of our CIOs are coming out of the business operations side. So that's a lot of learning they're having to do, because they're managing a technical budget. Right? They have to be good leaders in organizational change management. And in the CIO's perspective, that change management is very technology-centric. It's about technology change management as opposed to business culture change management. And they really need to be intimate with the running of the business of IT, or the IT operations. And of course, like any leader, they need to be a good leader. They need to be able to motivate. They need to be able to influence cultural change. They need to be a good partner sitting at that C-suite table. So I think we need a new chief, right? And we need a new data chief, right? That sits at the table with the other chiefs, at the business table with the other chiefs. The point that Aiken is trying to make, again, in that same study, is that if I'm going to be looking for data to be this reusable, repeatable asset that's on the balance sheet, it needs to be perceived holistically across all functional areas, across the business need of use of that data and the implementation of systems to enable that use. And it needs to be done independently of the technology. The management of data needs to take on this asset management mindset that's absent of technology. Because there's fundamental philosophical and practical differences between managing data as an asset and managing it in a technical sense. So why wouldn't I put it under the CIO? Well, first of all, when there are data problems, the people, the line of business people, they feel the impact because they're out there, they're customer facing. And yes, the CIO will feel the impact as well because they come right to the CIO when there's a data issue. But at the end of the day, the CIO is not feeling that direct impact from the customers like those line of business managers do. Right? And the CIO, he doesn't really understand all those business rules, those organizational business rules and governance rules, like that collective body of the business units do. Right? We also don't have control over those data experts because they're all buried in the business units. Right? I don't have control over them. I can request them, but if they have competing priorities on their list from their functional line manager, I might get some of their time, but I'm not going to get their focus. So I don't have this direct authority to be commensurate with the accountability. And at the end of the day, it's the The business defines this stuff. The CIO's organization doesn't define the rules for data. We don't. We implement it. We influence it. We try to understand it, but we don't define it. We don't own that responsibility. Right? But it's still under the CIO because CIO owns all the methods around the capture, the storage, the provisioning, the consumption of information, right? But we don't own the data. And why should we own the data? And our primary function within business is to leverage the technology and enable the creation and the consumption of data, right? So, if we look at how well we've been doing, by and large, and I know there's exceptions. I know there's people out there going, Lampa, you're killing me here. We're rocking on this stuff. We already have it figured out. But by and large, we've been keeping this data asset management ownership implicit. It's not explicit. It's an implicit thing under the CIO, and we're not doing a good job. We're just not doing a real good job at it. We're fighting. We're spending $1.2 trillion, to the tune, use that just as a metric for how well of a job we're doing. Right? So let's talk about the CDO. What does he do? Well, he's not constrained by an IT project mindset. He takes a program manager view. And we all understand the concept of program management and data warehousing. We know it's an ongoing program. We're saying here is that the management of data as an asset, it too is an ongoing program. It should not be constrained by any individual project. It should have oversight and governance and input into the execution of those projects. And my job as a CDO is solely on one subject area. I am managing the enterprise information as an asset on the balance sheet, right? And I'm going to be very knowledgeable at that kind of job. I have qualifications around data asset management. I have qualifications around asset management just as a function, and I have data savvy, and I'm going to bring the two of those together, right? And I'm going to have special expertise around that. And probably would be very helpful if, in addition to my experience as a data savvy asset manager, to have some level of certification and qualification around that. And I get to have the ultimate authority over making the decisions on behalf and in conjunction, collaborating with all those functional areas within the business unit for the rules of definition and sanitation and use and consumption. Right? Therefore, I need to be reporting into the business side of the house. I need to be sitting at the table with these business guys, being a trusted partner and advisor across all the functional areas of the business. And from a background standpoint, I need to have a lot of knowledge and experience around standards and integration. I need to have experience around business competencies, understanding functional areas of the organization. I might be a research scientist or an enterprise information manager, or maybe even a very, very talented data analyst that really understands business through the lens of data, and is a very trusted partner. It understands organizational change management. Top 4 qualifications is that hands-on asset management background, whether that asset management is fixed asset management, but the fundamentals of what asset management is about, and being able to run an asset management operation. And also, again, being able to lead large change management programs. And there's a lot of organizational change management. We're going to talk about it in a minute. This is a culture thing, right? And have that ability to be a trusted leader, right? Both with my peers and with the people that I'm bringing up and getting them to understand the beauty of asset management. So some of the early CDOs that have come along, some of the trailblazers, in 2003, Capital One and Yahoo both announced their CDOs. And then in 2008, remember, we had our credit crisis, right? And in the financial services industry, all of a sudden, the need for CDOs showed up. I was with a computer technology firm who also started to implement the concept of data asset management after they got slapped with an SEC filing. Stop and think about it for a second, guys and gals. Sorry, I'm from Chicago, so guys is a gender-neutral thing, okay? Why do we implement disciplines only after these like major crises hit us, right? Why aren't we getting out in front of it? You know, when we look now at the early adopters, banks and financial investment firms are leading the charge around this concept of asset management because they got nailed. That industry got hit really hard, and now, of course, there's a lot of, as a result of that legacy event, there's a lot of compliance coming after that industry. So who's next? Think about it. How about healthcare, right? There's all sorts of compliance coming down on healthcare. Some of our other public services like education. Why don't we get on board now before we have another legacy event? Right? So, you know, some of the early adopters we're seeing now in recent years now is heavy in financial services. We're seeing it in various government agencies as well as in the insurance sector. And when you look at it, all those have something in common. There's a lot of regulation going on in those industries. A lot of focus around proper use of data and proper custodianship of data. Based on some research that Gartner and the CIO Journal did in, I think it was just last year, we've got over 100 CDOs now publicly announced, which has doubled from 2012. And about 70% of those were created just last year. And we're seeing a lot of it in the US, but also a fast growth within the United Kingdom and in other countries. And when you break it down, a good 25% of these CDOs are coming out of New York and DC, which lends itself to those verticals, right? Because there's a high concentration of those industries in the area. And interestingly, 25% of them are women, and 13% of those women were CIOs that moved over into the CDO role. And roughly 2/3 of them are reporting to the business, and the other third is still reporting into IT, which tells you a little bit around the cultural thing. You know, your mileage is going to vary in your organization. We still have to keep in mind and embrace the fact that there's a cultural element here. We can define the role, but then, you know, how to evolve that role is going to be heavily dependent on how do I effectively and incrementally and opportunistically change the culture of my organization to buy into this asset management discipline. So there's a prediction out there that 25% of the Fortune 500 will have a named CDO by the end of next year. So you heard it here. We'll see how well we do on that. So the qualifications of the CDO, some kind of bachelor's degree in finance and business or computer science, a good 10 to 15 years hands-on data-savvy kind of work, right? Including implementing data governance programs, laying out overall business architectures, looking at information across the entire enterprise lifecycle, driving a lot of quality engineering type disciplines, both in process re-engineering as well as data quality, using things like Deming or lean process engineering, people with those kinds of expertise. And then again, good knowledge in that industry across the functional area, so good domain knowledge in the industry as a whole, and being able to be very conversant with all the functional heads within that organization in that industry. And again, good, strong leadership around organizational change management. Right. And the last point is you know, there's going to be a lot of politics there, so this has to be a trusted person. And how do you get trusted? I mean, you got to be willing to step up and say, I'm taking this route, and I'm going to accept the risk, and I'm going to celebrate the successes with my people. But I'm putting a stake in the ground, and I'm going to stand behind it. And through that trusted partnership and leadership, I can help start to change culture. It's a very, you know, you got to be a savvy storyteller, and you have to be a trusted partner. So let's look at, you know, the impact of what we're talking about, because one of the things that the CDO is going to want to do is kind of change our data-centric change our mindset to be more of a data-centric development focus from where we are today. By and large today, we have our corporate goals and strategies that turn into objectives, and then we make sure that those objectives and the functional areas that need automation to meet those objectives have the right systems implemented and in place. And those systems have computer and system infrastructure requirements. So my portfolio of applications then drives my portfolio of compute, storage, and network infrastructure requirements. And then I talk about data. Right? I stand up my data warehouse architecture, right, after the fact. And the point that we're bringing out here is, let's move that data savvy, that data knowledge, that awareness of data as an asset right up underneath the definition of goals and objectives. And let that then drive down into the infrastructure requirements and the application system requirements. So take more of this enterprise data architecture approach and data asset management approach and move that up in the processing flow when I'm driving out implementing strategies and architectures to support the business strategy. So it's kind of a decoupling of the data asset management from the application systems management. And it starts to drive more of the requirements down into those application system portfolios. So when we look at data-centric principles, using data as an asset to support the organizational strategy, right? I can talk in full sentences with a focus around the nouns of those sentences when I'm having discussions with the business unit. So the business unit is telling me the kinds of strategies they're going to want to have, and I'm sitting there thinking about, oh, I'm thinking of the kinds of data you got to bring together. You know, if an organization wants to get into a new market, I'm thinking of all the kinds of data I want to bring together, either external syndicated data or my historical data, to be able to help them decide where those markets ought to be and how to penetrate those markets, right? And as part of that, I've got to make sure I've got a good focus around quality, and I got to have a good focus around how do I continue, because of that quality and a byproduct of that quality, how do I promote a lot of reuse? How do I market? I got to get out and market and do an awareness campaign, letting people know, guys, we already have this data already queued up for you. Stop creating your shadow IT applications. Stop creating Riot. Let's reuse what we have. And if we have a gap, let's work together to bring it together into that reusable, pristine repository. So more focus around data as an output of the IT project work products, right? I'm not saying that we stop focusing around functionality that these application systems give, but put more emphasis around the data architecture and how it supports my enterprise data asset management. And if I do that, I should be able to start reducing some of the complexity of asset management principles inside of those individual applications. I should start to reduce Riot data. I should, you know, that are redundant and obsolete data. And I should be able to reduce the need for a lot of those data maintenance activities that are associated with all these shadow IT systems that are running around. And at the end of the day, maybe even improve my throughput from IT, which is a good thing. I think our business communities would enjoy that, right? From a responsibility standpoint, it is just a very enterprise data strategy approach. And how do I create an enterprise data strategy? You know, probably one of the first things I got to do is I got to inventory what I got. I have to do an assessment. Where am I versus where do I need to be? You know, do a little maturity assessment from a data asset management discipline, and then from that assessment, lay out a program plan that says incrementally, this is how we're going to move down the road because here's my strategy and here's how I'm going to execute it against it. And part of asset management, the whole concept around data governance, which is a very difficult component to even today inside organizations, standing up an effective data governance structure, data governance becomes a very inherent part of that data asset management strategy. And it includes understanding the use of data, the creation, the use, the rules for data, and the business processes underneath that, from all the operational systems to all the analytical systems, all the integration points between all those applications, all those processes, as well as how those processes are interacting with data become part of this enterprise data asset management strategy. And of course, you know, with data quality, we've got to have good quality standards and operational procedures to ensure we enforce those standards. That's the CDO working with all those functional units and saying, when you enter your data, I know we can't add edits to that data entry screen, but please, let's enforce these standard operating procedures because we'll see if they're not happening because we got these data quality metrics coming out. But we've got to start producing more pristine data at point of entry, for example. And the oversight around security and privacy becoming very top of mind for the chief security officers, especially as our data is starting to get proliferated outside of our data center, as well as we've got a lot of self-service tools. You guys, I'm sure, were in the hall at some point. There's a lot of self-service BI and analytic tools coming online, and the businesses love it, right? I don't have to wait for an ITQ. I can take this stuff and run with it. Well, from a data asset management strategy, I got to figure out how to put governance around that to enable the agility of self-service, yet be able to put a lot of good quality control around it. So where would it fit? And what would the structure look like? You know, so here's the chief data officer's domain, his data management organization, made up of the enterprise architects and metadata administrators to enforce the DNA of data, maybe the enterprise resource management group, and the integrators and developers, which could be contentious. And then you see a lot of dotted lines. So there's this matrix model that is being proposed here. This is a Capgemini suggested architecture or organizational chart. Your mileage will vary in your org. But those dotted lines, I'm going to make a note here. That's an area of concern. Matrix management's tough, right? And we are seeing the rise of the chief analytics officer, somebody that's driving on behalf of the business how the data should be used so that I'm not just building data and they will come. So there's some opportunities there for another partner for the CDO. But there's going to be a lot of political challenges with it. Notably, it's going to be a cultural thing. I'm going to see, as this person gets their arms around all the data, there's going to be a lot of exposure around how poor the data is. And there's going to be the threat of this new emperor saying that my baby's ugly. I'm going to lose authority, responsibility, people, budget. That's going to be a concern for many organizations. So, you know, in closing, there's a handful of CDO summits that I'm not going to read those all off to you, but there's several of them coming up. And if you can find one of these that fits your schedule and your budget, you might want to take advantage of them to get more educated on this. You know, so in closing, food for thought. You know, it's just some questions. Does your company really look at data as an asset? Could you quantify it and put it on the balance sheet? Is there a way to do it? Can I value that data? If I'm generating revenue off the data, maybe that's the basis for its value on the balance sheet. And who's responsible? In your organization, what one person is responsible for the overall health, right? And what qualifications and responsibilities they have, and what chief are they reporting to today? Right? Is it in technology or IT? And who reports to them? And given some of the cultural impacts and the mindset changes, what do you think the propensity is in your organization to adopt this new office of data asset management? Okay? Thank you.